Hello, everyone. Today we're joined by Josh Yen, who is a very good friend of mine. And I first met him at Harrow when he was leading the Philosophy Society. I remember even then, like his way of like teaching and explaining concepts was really engaging. And he did an undergraduate degree in philosophy and theology from Oxford. And I think you've just finished like an MPhil in philosophical theology as well. Um, so yeah, first question, could you explain what got you interested into philosophy? Was there a specific book, essay, video that you can recall?
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's great to be able to speak to your audience. We go way back, all the way to my high school days. So it's full circle moment to be able to speak to you about this, something I really love. And I think what got me into philosophy is kind of twofold. I started off with the courses philosophy and theology. Theology I was interested in first before I got into philosophy, so I was interested in questions of Christian doctrine, theology, religious belief, how that changes kind of interdenominational debates, and how that transforms the understanding of religion, God, and things like that. And then after a while, this was when I was about maybe 13 or 14, that I fell out of love with this kind of academic sphere for a bit. I went and just was interested in other things, other child teenage preoccupations like having a girlfriend. And then we broke up, and I was like, now I have a lot of time on my hands to focus on something else. And I met another guy, great friend of mine, and we started getting into philosophy together. Engaged, started off with existentialist philosophy. I remember one of the first books I read was Albert Camus' The Myth of Sisyphus and The Stranger. Was really interested in this. My friend was interested in this as well. We started then exploring the ideas related to Camus, and one of the ways that you could do it is go, I guess, to Dostoevsky, one of Camus' major influences. He really liked or vibed with Ivan Karamazov and the brothers Karamazov. And so I got really interested in Dostoevsky and Nietzsche. That was kind of my philosophical kind of introduction. Of course, a bit literature as well, and that kind of shapes my broader research focus, which is focused on, of course, a more interdisciplinary studies. People could look at what I work on. It's very much interdisciplinary. It's not really that specific, not that specified, and I'm sure we'll talk about that in a bit. But essentially, I went into philosophy through engaging with Dostoevsky and Nietzsche and existentialism. That's probably where I got into it. Then I did a bit of philosophy of religion as well. Kind of this is my high school era, and ever since then I've been really interested in the problem of evil, phenomenology, of course some analytic philosophy training, some metaphysics and not, but whatnot, but mostly still within this kind of analytic philosophy of religion, evil, phenomenology, so a bit of history of philosophy as that. So that's probably a kind of a broad introduction of
Hmm.
my interests, some of the different areas and topics that got me into this field.
Yeah, cool. Okay. So I know you also engaged with a lot of like academic research relating to this, like in your, I guess, later years past like this initial exposure to philosophy and theology. So can I ask, what do you enjoy most about academia?
Yeah, well, I think academic research is a fun thing. I think I have a lot of criticisms of academia as much as I like a lot of academia about it. I think I'll start off with what I like about academia. I like the fact that you're playing in the big leagues now, and a cool fun thing is, especially when you go to a university like the University of Oxford, you end up meeting a lot of big names in the field, and it really raises your level a lot. The
Right.
people that you
Yeah.
surround yourself with, and this is not just something with philosophy; it's something with every field you go into. But it's just the case that philosophy, the big games, the big players are in academia. You rarely find them outside maybe think tanks, but when you're surrounded by people who inspire you, they're better than you, especially at a young age like myself, you really get to learn and step up your game. And having these discussions, having these talks with people is really what I enjoy. I get to meet people, have conversations with them, chat to them, learn from them, have them criticize my ideas, because philosophy is unlike maybe science where it's a lot about test results. You join a research group, the research the leader kind of gives you a direction of what you might be doing, or depending on what the group project you're working on, you kind of follow that. Philosophy is very much based on ideas, and the currency of an academic philosopher is the ideas and arguments that they can present. And the only way you can engage with those arguments and ideas is through just having discussions with people, getting challenged, offering pushback, having good feedback, but also standing your ground and engaging with these people is what I like most about academia. I think is just being surrounded by a strong community of fellow academics.
Yeah, I think that's pretty important to remember. Like research is always about contributing to like a broader research community, as opposed to just like churning out papers on your own ideas. But it's like actively responding to each other. And I think it's that kind of like dialogic process, which I'm personally really drawn to when doing research as well.
And I guess there is something that has to be said about the need for publication as well, which
Right.
can easily become quite toxic as well. I
Yes.
think, it is such a competitive field, especially if you're looking at the job market to get these publications. And since publications always say, oh, you need a novel contribution to the field, that leads to it forces people to try to think of new ideas, which I think can have its benefits. It's forcing us to be novel, creative, but it also has the cost of saying, well, actually, is some of this research being done because we think the idea is good, or are we doing this research
Mm.
just because we think it's a new
Right.
idea?
Yes.
And especially when it's not a science, this can be quite dangerous because it's very easy for us to think, okay, this is all abstract, and say, well, okay, I could get this publication in X, Y, and Z journal because it's a new sounding, flashy idea. But actually, we don't. It's very easy for academic philosophers, and even me included, to forget that ideas have consequences. Someone who reads Schopenhauer is not just thinking about kind of how things are in the world, but it is fundamentally a shaping of how they view the world itself and their own experience. So, I think that's a responsibility that academics have to remember is when we're doing these ideas, when we're trying to publish, yes, practically speaking, you need these publications, but at the same time, you recognize just don't, I guess, I hope that people don't just do things for the sake of doing it, because that can lead to the dangerous spread of ideas, which may not be helpful.
Right. Yeah. Do you think a possible way of mitigating that would be having stronger interconnections between academia and like the public sphere and sort of engaging in public philosophy, which I know you do a lot through like your YouTube channel as well and like your platform?
Yeah, I think public philosophy is important. I think that's quite keen. I think we would need some reform of the university system coming up. I think that's going to be quite important. Perhaps having less focus on the publication career of teachers and have more focus on teaching ability, especially for undergraduate courses. I think that's something that could
Mm.
be way better, because at the end of the day, someone who could be a very good publisher might not be a very good teacher, and vice versa. So, if we have more rigid separation between the two, not to say that one can't teach the other and have overlap, but if we have that separation, then it might allow for more freedom for actually people who want to just do teaching to actually teach instead of being forced to publish, and vice versa.
Right.
Now,
Yeah.
I do think we can't do you have a question about that, or?
Oh, no, no, no. Continue.
Yeah, so I mean, I was just going to touch a bit upon public philosophy. I think public philosophy is quite important, but at the same time, not everyone is called to do public philosophy, right? Having a forward-facing platform is very time-consuming, and I think a lot of academics would oftentimes not find that desire to kind of work on their publications, do their teaching, do all their admin stuff, and then run a YouTube channel or do news on the side. I think what YouTube has done very well is to allow for people like yourself, me, and other of my friends to be able to publicize philosophy by interviewing people. I think this is something that can be done more often. So instead of having philosophers, always making their own content, they can rely on being interviewed and have more of these platforms coming up. And there's a lot of these platforms coming up, like yourself, like my channel, like some of my friends like Miles Donahue, like a lot of people running around. We're doing a lot of this, and I think that could be a way for more outreach and interaction with the public.
Right. Yeah. Agreed. I guess linking to that question, what do you think is the role that philosophy should play today?
This is interesting because I was at a finance kind of event, and everyone there
Uh-huh.
was kind of in STEM, in finance, and they're asking, well, what is philosophy? Is this like an academic field? And I do think there's two definitions of philosophy, and one which is inevitably going to sound very esoteric and very insular, which is, okay, the philosophy is done by the academic in the tower discussing abstract debates about
Right.
metaphysics, composition, constitution, epistemology, theories of knowledge, models of knowledge, and whatnot, language, or whatever other ethical field you have in the ivory tower. That's one idea of a philosopher. Or you have the idea that everyone is indeed a philosopher. And I think, and I'm drawn to that second idea. I think people who ask themselves the important questions, even though they are somewhat ironically not the main questions in philosophy, at least these days, are the questions that make people a philosopher. Questions like, what is worthy of my finitude, to borrow a line from my friend Aaron Simmons, or to think about, well, what am I doing with my life? We all face a finite experience and existence on this earth. What does it mean to be in the world, as Heidegger would ask? And I think
Mm.
questions like this are things that people, even though they might not term it as Dasein or Heidegger or
Right.
authenticity
Yeah.
or whatever terms people use, are questions that everyone has to confront with, and they might even not do this consciously. They might do this subconsciously. How one lives their life tells you as much about their philosophy as one actually says what they believe in. And in some facts, the way they live their life is a better representation of their philosophy than their actual written work. So in that sense, I think it's important for people to actually say, well, let's broaden this idea of philosophy. Let's not be gatekeepers to say, oh, you must be able to read analytic philosophy to be a philosopher. No, it's something that everyone does in virtue of existing, and by reflecting more on our existence, we are able to experience what it is like to be a philosopher and ask ourselves these important questions in life.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think what you said there reminded me of this Roman Christian maxim, like lex orandi, lex credendi, like the
Mm-hmm.
law of prayer is the law of belief. Like it's through practice that we see what we truly believe in. And I think that's very true of philosophy as well. Like even if someone claims to believe in one philosophy, but they live their life in a certain way, then I think that is their true philosophy in like in instantiated form. And then there's people who don't really introspectively think that much, but then they still live in a certain way towards a certain like kind of telos, which I think does reveal a philosophy beneath their actions. Yeah.
Yeah, and also building on that, I do think there is an aspect where one also has to have a lot of grace and recognizing that sometimes there also is that aspect where it's one can argue for a philosophy but realize it's difficult to reach. And I mean, there's this famous phrase in Paul where some people might say he's not much of a philosopher, but that's, I suppose, for a different discussion. So he says, what I want to do, I don't do, and what I do want to do, what
Mm,
I want to do, I don't, and what I do, I do not want to do, I do. So there is this dynamic where it's not, we live in a practical world and we live in a world with restraints. It's not just, we're not just Berkeley idealists, some kind of with a mind just thinking
yeah.
about how things are and imposing things on the mind. So there is that inevitable and, necessary limit between what we proclaim in our philosophies as our lives. So there's that inevitable divide there. But I think the broader principle stands that we should be trying to strive towards philosophy that we proclaim. And if we are unable to do that for one reason or another, we should think, why can't we do this? And is this a reason to falsify or change our assumptions?
Yeah, agreed. So now let's get into some of the research that you've done. This is based on like a recent paper that I think is a forthcoming publication of yours. What is the distinction between theoretical and pastoral problems of evil, and what is its significance?
Yeah, so this is a paper coming out in Agathos. People can find a preprint for that on my Phil Papers platform. So if you type in Phil Papers and put my name, Joshua Yen, and you'll be able to find this paper and read a preprint version of it. Essentially, the problem of evil is one of the areas I'm very interested in. It's the problem, it's in the philosophy of religion. Classical question: if God exists, why is there evil? Is this inconsistent? Is this logically inconsistent? Is this just improbable? How do we approach this? Now, throughout literature, you have mostly, at least in the philosophical side of things, you have a very strong emphasis on the distinction between the theoretical and pastoral problem view. And the idea behind this is to say, well, as academic philosophers, we don't want to be influenced, especially in the analytic sphere. We don't want to be influenced by personal opinions and features of subjectivity. So, for example, if someone was going through a really tough time and we ask, well, why does God allow this person to go through this really tough time? It's very difficult to quantify to quantify actually what does this mean? What does it mean for them to be going through a really tough time? And to what extent can or should God allow for that person to go through a certain thing? If something happened to me and the same thing happened to someone else, our reactions might be drastically different based on our psychological constructs, our background, our life experience. And as a result of that, it's very difficult to quantify, how can we engage with this pastoral side of things? This subjective side of things, and therefore the academics want to approach it from a perspective a bit more abstraction. So you have this start of this kind of disclaimer they put in the front of most of their work, saying, well, this is purely a discussion about theory, not a discussion about the pastoral problem. But nonetheless, there's oftentimes areas where that emotional side gets snuck back in, the subjective side gets snuck back in. And a good example of this would be, well, you read literature on the problem of evil, and there's an inevitable reliance on things like the Holocaust, other horrendous evils. And the problem about that is not necessarily, and this is why I found this very important, is because, yes, these are grave evils, but by raising them in our theoretical discussions, it ends up bringing in a lot of emotional baggage as well. So if we were to do an analysis, if I asked you to do an analysis of the Holocaust, and you would come to a certain conclusion about, well, okay, to what extent is this evil justified? Can evil be justified? Does this challenge the very frameworks of consequentialist ethics in general? You have these questions which are theoretical, but there's also an aspect of, well, just watching the Schindler's List by who was the director for that? I can't remember that all of a
Scorsese.
sudden. Scorsese, yes,
Yeah.
indeed. So there's something that watching Scorsese's The Schindler's List is going to give you a certain emotion that no amount of analysis could ever give you
Hmm.
on it. But that's oftentimes I found snuck in the back. They say we don't want to deal with pastoral problem. We don't. My theoretical theodicy, my free will defense, my soul building theodicy, it doesn't apply to the person who came out of Auschwitz. But at the same time, when we're thinking about these concepts, there is almost an inevitable part where we bring back in these emotional pastoral problems to make our theoretical argument stronger. And thus, what this thesis is trying to do is first define how people understand the theoretical and pastoral problems, because in literature, I've identified at least 4 different ways in which this has been defined. So it's been used equivocally. So that's one. And then secondly, you say, well, actually, what is the best form of characterization for these ideas? So I identify this as a first and third personal perspective. So the theoretical should be abstract third person perspective of evil, and of course the pastoral problem being a first person perspective. How do people engage individually with suffering? So I think by separating on these lines, we can have a clear understanding of where the conflict really lies. And this allows me to make my broader claim, which I defend on the side, is to say that theoretical problem of evil is actually solved. There is sufficient evidence, or at least I think all the debates and arguments regarding the theoretical problem of evil have kind of been explored. And unless there's some theodicy which comes out of the blue, out of nowhere, which is possible, I think that the argument is generally, I think if someone looked at it purely abstractly, you would be able to find solutions to the problem.
Mm.
Now, where the problem is the pastoral problem. There is a fundamental lack of engagement with this pastoral reality of evil, about how we interpret evil, how evil changes our understanding of God, how evil has shaped our understanding of the world. These questions about the phenomenology of evil are things which are perhaps deserving of more attention. And that's where I think debate should go. So I guess to summarize this whole project in a nutshell, I challenge the traditional distinction made between the theoretical and pastoral problem of evil, saying that this has not been made clear enough to the detriment of clarity and univocal debates in the problem of evil, and instead we should move further towards other debates, or at least more precise debates in the first person problem of evil, separated from the third person, and vice versa, to have further clarity in theological debates.
Great. That's really interesting. I guess the only like distinction that I've heard of before in the problem of evil literature is between the logical and evidential problems. But I think
Mhm.
a lot of people agree that after Plantinga, the logical problem is sort of it's been like definitively solved, and now it's just the evidential that's left. And I think within the evidential problem, would you say there's still like this subdivision of theoretical and pastoral, where
Well,
pastoral
I
is sort of
think
like a subset of the evidential problem?
Well, I think that's an interesting question you make, because I think what we see is the logical and evidential are different categories within the theoretical problem of evil. So if we
Okay.
think about it, the logical problem of evil is presented very much in a third person language. It's
Right.
God
Yeah.
exists, evil exists. This is contradictory. Same with the evidential problem of evil. God there should not be gratuitous evils if God exists, which is kind of a summary of Rowe's argument. And then you have the abductive problem of evil, which is kind of an evidential form of evil presented by Paul Draper, which I think is probably the strongest,
Okay.
who's probably the leading proponent of the problem of evil in contemporary literature. He recently published a book called Atheism and the Problem of Evil, where he's saying, well, okay, let's just see what would we expect if God exists, and what would we expect if there was either no God or an indifferent God. And he says the world we see is just is more likely to be the case given an indifferent God than a loving God, which is, I think, is an interesting argument. It is actually a more challenging argument than the evidential problem of evil. I do think it poses a really strong challenge
Okay.
in that
Yeah.
regard. But nonetheless, all of these are, I guess, theoretical problems. They're not saying, well, how do you respond to the kid coming out of Auschwitz, or how do you respond to the person whose father died,
Right. Yeah.
or who's sick, and that is where the theoretical and pastoral problem comes in, is to say, well, we can have theoretical debates, and then we can have these pastoral discussions and these phenomenological discussions. But under the theoretical, we have these divisions into the logical problem, um, you know, evidential and abductive problems underneath that theoretical. So while we're maintaining within third person analysis, we're staying within the theoretical problem. So when we move to first person analysis, we're moving into the pastoral. So I guess this is what can be called a meta-theology. It's these categories which transcend one's position within these debates.
Mm, okay, interesting. Yeah. I guess linking to my next question, as you expand your research into continental philosophy and phenomenology, how do continental tools allow us to engage with evil and suffering in ways that traditional analytic philosophy of religion cannot? Do you think, since you're focusing on the first personal experience that of suffering and evil, that immediately reminds me of phenomenology. So do you think some of those conceptual tools can be used to analyze this pastoral problem of evil?
Yeah, definitely. I think phenomenology is the way to go for the first person problem of evil, because in many ways, the pastoral problem of evil is a question of human experience and a question of metaphysics. Theoret the very idea of Husserl's and kind of production is very much to bracket out the concerns of metaphysics of what is fundamental reality, but to just focus on how we experience the world. And in this way, I do think this allows us to engage with evil and suffering that traditional debates in metaphysics simply do not have. It opens up our lens to a new field of study, which is really important. And I do think that this reflects a broader kind of dividing line between analytic and continental philosophy. Now this line is itself a bit kind of vague and people have been questioning it. But I do think, at least within the philosophy of religion, this division does indeed hold. And there is a very strong concern that people have in at least analytic philosophy that by opening our realm to these phenomenological perspectives, it makes it fundamentally impossible to have any progress or
Mhm.
developments. But
Right.
in reality, that might just simply be the case of evil and suffering. I mean, I think if someone just reflects enough on the experiences of evil and suffering that they come experience in their lives, it seems to me quite intuitive to think that, well, actually, maybe these are just fundamentally different things to different people. There is this dispositional problem of evil found in David Hume, which suggests that the very fact that we respond to evil in a different way is itself a problem of evil, because in theory
Mm,
we should just experience it in the same way and that we can have this clear analysis, or maybe we shouldn't be experiencing this at all. But the very fact that we have different approaches to evil, such that event X might mean Y to mean A to me and B to you, is something that should not be expected on a theistic hypothesis. So there's
right.
ways to
Yeah.
explore that in that regard, right? But I guess this is simply to say that I think when we're going into discussing a phenomenon as intimate and as heavy as evil and suffering, we need to take into consideration these tools, which analytic philosophy, at least to my knowledge, simply just doesn't have the tools to address. Which is not to say analytic philosophy is bad. I think a lot of people on the continental side like insulting the analytics and vice versa. But fundamentally, we need to recognize that there are different dimensions of concepts, and we have to engage with all of them and not just try to, gatekeep our way into one
Right.
camp or the other.
Yes. Hmm. I guess one worry I have about phenomenology is that my impression of it now, do correct me if I feel like it's still this sort of overgeneralization of experience. Like there's still these general maxims about how experience works. Like intentionality is there. There is this noema, which is then like directed into there's like almost scientific, I'd say. But I guess it doesn't really lean into the subjective ways that people's individual psyches sort of experience the world in different ways, which I think perhaps continental like psychoanalytic theories do emphasize more like sort of subjective experience of reality as opposed to like generalizations about that subjective experience. So do you think that could also be another path forward?
Yeah, definitely. And I think even phenomenology itself is reflecting that as time goes on. You
Hmm.
have kind of, as you say, you have this more this rule oriented process of phenomenology established first by Husserl. Well, it comes further like Brentano and whatnot, but
Hmm.
you have this idea, you have these ways in which phenomenology should be done. At least you could call this maybe classical phenomenology. It's probably not a term in literature. It might be. I haven't.
Huh.
I'm kind of I'm kind of a bit rusty on my phenomenology at
It's
this present
okay.
moment. But you have these rules of how you meant the reduction and what ways you should do phenomenology.
Right. Yeah.
But of course, with each phenomenologist and with each era, you have these massive changes. Husserl to Heidegger shows a drastic
Mm,
shift. You know,
yeah.
the importance of being in the world instead of the emphasis on the transcendental ego. I mean, you know, you have very fundamental shifts in each of these stages, and then Merleau-Ponty focusing on, I think, the body and experiencing through the body, and then you get, of course, to the new phenomenologists, which some people like to question whether they're phenomenologists or not. People like Jacques Derrida, Emmanuel Levinas, these people who you could almost consider as phenomenologists. How does the world appear to us in our experience? And my friend J. Aaron Simmons, he has a book on new phenomenology, which he wrote with Bruce Ellis Benson, and he tries to defend this kind of new phenomenologists like Derrida, Levinas, and Marion to say, well, yes, there are new ways in which phenomenology should be explored going forward, and that despite these perhaps having less rules as classical phenomenology has found with Husserl, they're nonetheless trying to engage with what is the reality of human experience. And I think as time goes on, as we develop our understanding of psychology, both as a scientific field as well as a philosophical field, we would be able to really try to bridge in these divisions together, bridge in these traditions together, see what we can learn from each other. Because I do think there still is a very strong pushback in the literature against this idea of trying to adopt too much of a scientific method, because that in some sense goes against an empirical scientific method, which might go against some of the presuppositions of classical phenomenology. But nonetheless, I do think by opening our boundaries, by opening these barriers, these gatekeeping kind of practices that every single philosophical field has, by opening them up, we're able to learn more about experience and have a more accurate understanding of humanity. And if that means that experience is fundamentally subjective and there is no unified way, no unified lens, no unified structure, whatever word you want to use to describe this experience of engaging with the world, well, then that's better for us, because we're all trying to pursue the truth, and by understanding more ways of engaging with the world, we're able to get closer to this.
Mm, yeah, I totally agree. Next question is linking to, I guess, some of your earlier engagements with philosophy as a young person. But I know you're really into
Still very
Dostoevsky
young,
as
I
well.
think.
Yeah, like younger
Still
person.
22.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. In what way is fiction an important avenue for exploring philosophical ideas, and can fiction do something with philosophy that nonfiction can't?
I think so. Maybe I'm biased when I say this. I still remember the days I was reading The Idiot in the sofa
Uh-huh.
in the Harrow school library. Those are good days. Or reading
Huh.
Nicholas Karamazov. Very very fond memories of my time in high school. And and fiction is something which allows us to explore, I think, questions in philosophy which are less quantifiable or less concrete. For example, questions of meaning in life. I mean, these things, you know, there's only so much you can do by trying to put it into first order logic, your debates about meaning in life or whatnot. I mean, is it really something reducible to syllogisms? There's a attempt that there is a sense in which I think it's fundamentally impossible to do that. Or for
Mm,
example, phenomenology is the best way to understand how we experience the world through analysis, through writing nonfiction, or is it through just putting people into creating a fictional universe where people engage with each other in different ways and trying to
mm,
explore the implications of that, how people engage with the world, and see which model of or whose experience is the most genuine or authentic, or who do you connect most with? And I think these are things which philosophy which are philosophical questions which fiction can address and nonfiction struggles to address. And it also, I think, it it allows you to also express yourself in ways you might not be able to do with nonfiction. Of course, the analytic criticism of that would be to say, well, yeah, that shows why you cannot make this a rigorous study, because you precisely cannot write it in nonfiction. For example, I'm pretty sure if Dostoevsky tried to write half of his ideas down in nonfiction, he wouldn't be able to do that.
mhm,
But at the same time, I think there is a truth in writing a story, writing an analogy, and trying to learn from it. There is a reason why the history of philosophy comes hand in hand with analogies and stories and illustrations. And this is something that even analytic philosophers do all the time. You read any analytic paper in ethics these days, you're almost surefire good to find analogy there. You read anything in metaphysics and constitution, most of
Mm,
the major texts in the last 20 years all have analogies in them. So it's not that analogies aren't accepted in analytic philosophy. And I think fiction is just a mega analogy for
mm.
the points that you're trying to convey. And maybe, yes, you might not have the extra 80% of words surrounding your analogy to argue for it, but I do think it does touch upon the intuition that we're relying so heavily upon in philosophy.
Mm. Yes, I agree. Um, I guess one question though is I think with fiction, like especially with some of the contemporary literary theory, it's sort of been established that textual interpretation has sort of been weighted more than like authorial intention, and the author's intentions sort of sometimes are no longer valuable at all, and it's just what the reader makes of the text, which gives the text its meaning. So I guess my question for you is if text cannot reliably communicate philosophical messages in the way that the author intends it to, then um what use does it have?
Yeah, well, I think it has a heuristic, it has an educational purpose. You read the Bible, and every time you read it, something different comes out. You read Dostoevsky, something new comes out each time you read it. I mean, does it mean that I'm no longer faithful to Dostoevsky? Maybe my interpretation of Dostoevsky is not what he's saying, but nonetheless, I learned a lot from reading it. Philosophically, I reflect on different ideas. I reflect on ideas of ethics, and I read The Idiot. I reflect on ideas about meaning of life, and I read the Brothers Karamazov, God, evil, suffering in the Brothers Karamazov. Um, I kind of struggle with questions about history, the great man theory of history, when you read Crime and Punishment. There's all sorts of things that you can get out of it. But and also I also would like to push back on literary theory in this regard. It's come in. I think it's a mix of the two things. It's not that authorial intention doesn't matter. I think as students of literature, you need to understand authorial intention.
Hmm.
That's an important aspect of it. To the extent you can do it, right? Would we be able to figure out what Homer believed in when he was writing the Odyssey, if he wrote the
Uh-huh.
Odyssey, when he wrote the Odyssey, and all that. So maybe we wouldn't, right? But if we have a more modern figure like Dostoevsky, there's a lot of literature, his letters, his writings there, which can dictate our interpretation and try to figure out what he viewed and how he understood his own works. But then, of course, is there anything wrong for then saying, well, yes, we learned about it in this way, this is how it's being taught. But we can then shift it and say, well, yeah, maybe that's how we learn it. But in this other circumstance, I also learn another I also get something else out of it. Is there anything wrong with getting something else out of it in that way? I don't think so necessarily. So in that sense, it's a mix between these two fields. And, I think academics have this tendency to say, well, I want to be a very big academic, and therefore I'm going to do a very hard line view and defend this to the hilt, and then make everyone agree with this like black and white view of how things are. And in reality, it's a bit more vague than that. It's not like, oh, it must be no authorial intention, or yes, we only care about what the author says. It's a mix between the two, and I think we need to balance them.
Mm. Yeah, I totally agree. Because I think sometimes if you just completely disregard authorial intention, then that's sort of like I think there's an epistemic responsibility, perhaps not a moral responsibility, but definitely an epistemic one to sort of respect what the text was intended for and to not just like direct it towards your own ends and use it for your own purposes. Like I'm thinking of like Hitler sort of appropriating like a wrong interpretation of Nietzsche towards his sort of
Mm-hmm.
own gains. And I just don't think that is good. Like if maybe if he made the effort to understand Nietzsche's original ideas, then as they were intended, then a lot could have been changed. But yeah.
Mm. I suppose it depends on the Nietzsche case, whether he read Nietzsche after he had his Nazism and then
Okay,
read
fair
Nietzsche
enough.
into his
Yeah.
Nazism. Then, if he better understood Nietzsche, he wouldn't have been a Nazi. And I don't know. Depends. I suppose it would be for the historians of the channel to comment
Yes.
what you think the order was.
Yeah. Hmm. Okay. My final two questions relate to some of your work on AI and the philosophy of AI. So, first of all, can AI be used as a force for good? And if so, what conditions will allow for this? Because there's, I guess, a lot of negative discourse online about AI and about how it's sort of stripping us of our humanity. Um, Not only just replacing labor and jobs, but it's sort of functioning as like a substitute for thinking, especially people who use AI to like do their schoolwork. And I guess it's like third party intelligence, or as some of my friends like to call it, like you're just offloading all of your thoughts to this machine that doesn't really think. or have any kind of consciousness in the same way that a human does, at least. So yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, well, we have gotten to the age of vibe coding, vibe homeworking, or
Right,
whatever
right.
you want to
Yeah.
code this stuff. I think AI is just a tool like everything else. Has my arithmetic skills gotten worse when I got a calculator? Yeah, probably it does. I can't do mental math as quickly as I could do before. But at the same time, is it a tool that can be used in a good way? Yeah, the I think as a tool itself, it's neutral. What we can't do is then just hand too much to it. And this is represented by the growing field of compliance and regulations, anyways. And we have to care more about regulations and compliance more. And I think one of the main problems with AI is that it came out so quickly.
Mm,
AI as ChatGPT came out, as a large language model came out maybe, what, 4 years ago, something like that?
I think
Or
so.
maybe even
Yeah.
less than that. I can't remember
Three?
exactly when it
I don't
came
know.
out.
Yeah.
Three, something like that. But it came out before any compliance, philosophy, ethics has really been to think about, well, what are its limits? What are its use cases? How can it be applied? What are its psychological impacts and whatnot? And even within these 3 years, we're now talking about agentic AI. We're getting closer to embodied AIs, so physical AI, as they call it, I think. And in this sense, we're moving at a speed in which our debates and discussions of moral philosophy can't catch up with it. And I think that's a real danger, is once you go beyond a certain level of technological development, it's very difficult to then put it back into Pandora's box. If we open
Mm,
up if we open up the world to AI, that's great. But it's very difficult to then close it. If someone said, well, like imagine a hypothetical where someone was able to make a definitive proof that the use of any AI, LLMs, and whatnot was morally impermissible. What are the chances of us stop using AI tomorrow, even if the proof was there? I mean, I might be very cynical about human nature, but I can almost guarantee I would almost dare say publicly that I'll bet my bottom dollar that we'll still end up using ChatGPT anyways, just because, well, we already know how well it can help us with lives, help our efficiency. That, yeah, it might be the case that's completely immoral, but yeah, why not? Let's just keep doing this.
uh-huh.
The same thing goes, and I think the same thing would go with physical AI being integrated into warfare, into other areas of the human experience. If we let it go get out of the box, I think it's going to be very difficult to stop it, especially with so much financial and military and industrial benefits that are involved with it. Now this sounds very pessimistic, but I think there's still a lot of room for good. It's making us way more efficient. It's helping people who use it properly do things that they in the past would not be able to have the time to do. For example, I use AI to do a lot of the tasks that I simply would not. I used to just have to do all the time. I use it to do spreadsheets. I use it to help me do a lot of accounting for random things. So it helps me do a lot, and it saves so much time, such I could actually focus on more productive things in my life. If I didn't have AI working with alongside AI and having AI's help, I probably wouldn't be able to do all these publications, as well as run my YouTube channel, you know, as well as teach and tutor students philosophy, as well as go fishing all the time, as well as going golfing maybe once or twice a week, as well as playing on 3 football teams at Oxford, while going drinking with my friends every like Sunday night. You get what I mean, right? Like
Mm,
it would be impossible for me to maintain all my commitments. Now, if I was using AI to just plagiarize people and just write my papers for me, that would be a huge problem. But nonetheless, it does allow me to be way more efficient. So that's something we need to think about. How can I integrate it in a responsible way? I know this is a bit of a roundabout, long-winded answer, but I
no, it's
think I
great.
think I think that kind of covers a few of the bases that are important in this discourse.
Yeah. I think another important moral consideration that I've seen in some of the online discourses, like the environmental impacts of AI. Like I'm sure you've seen clips of like the data centers and how they're like really negatively affecting people's lives, whether it's through like really loud noise or like just damaging the water quality of the surrounding area. So what do you make of this? Do you think there should be like how should we respond to like the environmental impacts of using AI and be more conscious about it when trying to use it efficiently?
Yeah, I think it's the the relationship between environment and human development has always been a very tight one, and it's very difficult for us to fully understand or even unpack in this video. And
Hmm.
I have to say, I haven't put much thought into this. I would say it's important for us to care about the environment. And maybe one of the ways we can think about it is to really limit the, I guess, the extent of AI use and be a bit more aware of it. But then
Mm.
once again, I'm fully recognizing when I say this that, it's kind of like saying, well, be careful about using it, but just go use it anyways. So, I mean, it's probably not going to change much for people, but just kind of, I don't know. I think I don't think I'm the best person to speak on this, nor do I know enough about it. But I also think it's one of those things where I think human desire for efficiency and pragmatism would outweigh any environmental concerns.
Yeah.
What I would like to see, however, is perhaps more ways in which people can do, like maybe more startups instead of just saying, well, I want to be able to use AIs in different ways, but have some more startups trying to focus on how can I make data centers more environmentally friendly,
Hmm.
make them a bit more sustainable. That would be an interesting program to look into as well, I
Mm.
guess, on the side. But that's of course completely outside my comfort zone, and I'm not the best person to speak on this issue.
Uh-huh.
That's for
Yeah,
sure.
sure. Okay. Final question for now is, with AI rapidly reshaping how students read, write, and engage with ideas, what do you see as the greatest opportunities and risks of integrating AI into pedagogy?
I think the greatest opportunities, and I've been giving talks a bit on this greatest opportunities, I think it can be used to bounce ideas off. You know, one of the greatest blessings I had in high school was having a really, really close friend who would talk philosophy with me for hours and hours on end. And it shaped how we thought, it shaped how we reasoned. We debated philosophy for at least like 2, 3 hours. It was every single day for the course of like 2, 3 years. Like that did more benefit for anything that I've ever done than anything else I possibly could have found. Now, that's very rare, I think, especially in Hong Kong. Not many people want to do philosophy. You probably don't know. Well, you have the Philosophy Society, but you don't have
It's
the opportunity to have
severely dwindling
deep
in
debate.
numbers.
Well, you have to find ways to keep the subscriptions up. Then, well, not subscriptions, but the memberships up.
Right.
But it's one of those things where for people who can't have access to this or have access to tutors or people to actually help them personally, a good way is to just write the essay, put it into AI, and say, challenge my ideas. It will shape your. It genuinely is surprising how good it is at criticizing your arguments. Of course, you should tell it, don't flatter me and be direct. And sometimes maybe some of its criticisms are wrong. But even engaging with bad criticism is a way for you to get sharper at engaging with good criticism, because by being able to tell the difference between good philosophical objections and bad philosophical objections is a very good thing. And sometimes the reasons why AI criticizes you in a poor fashion is because you haven't actually presented your ideas very clearly, and you have to go back and switch that as well. So that is a very good opportunity. I highly recommend you to try to just insert your paper, your argument into an AI and say, criticize this, tell me what I'm doing well, what I could do better, and let's have a debate about how it should be run. That's a really great opportunity. What's the risk of integrating AI into pedagogy is if we, you know, vibe code with AI or vibe homework with AI. And why you call it vibe homeworking is was probably not my term. I'm sure someone has used it before, but vibe coding is kind of where you want to you want to code, you want to do something with code, you have no clue how to code, so I put in a prompt to Claude Code or what's Codex and say, I want to have this on my website, I want this to do this, to do that, so therefore I'm going to please write me a code in whatnot to get this result. If someone did that with all their homeworks, they would not learn a single thing at all. In the same way that a vibe coder by vibe coding is probably not going to learn much code by vibe coding.
Mhm.
And that's the same with pedagogy. And this is, of course, nothing new, right? I'm not saying anything groundbreaking here. It's kind of self-explanatory. But nonetheless, it's something I think students have to take this seriously, because at the end of the day, teachers are not going to be able to control AI usage. Teachers are not going to be able to say, oh, you
Right.
used AI, you didn't use AI, because AI is getting so good and it's so difficult to enforce that any attempt to enforce AI would lead to significant legal issues down the line. Like if you try to expel someone for using AI, the way you can prove that he used AI is very difficult unless you actually can look at his AI kind of conversation chat log and see what he's done.
Mhm.
And even then, he might just have a hidden account on some other platform that no one would ever find out, right? So that's kind of impossible. But what we need to teach students is to help them recognize that they should not be using AI in certain ways for their own benefit. And if we can convince students not to be doing that, then that would be the best way forward, I think.
Mm. Yeah, agreed. So you think there should definitely still be some spaces in education reserved for like purely non-AI work, but then there could be other spaces where there could be that integration, but it's important to preserve like the pure human kind of production in the traditional way of like learning knowledge.
Yeah, it's like how we learn to walk before we run, and or how we ride a bicycle before we drive a car. It's you need to be able
Mm,
to know the foundations of how to think, how to reason, before you can then reason with an AI. If you
right.
never learn how to reason and just talk to AI all the time, then you're never going to learn the skills of reason, critical thinking, debates, discussions. Of
Mm,
course, AI can be used to develop these skills, but that AI has to be used in a responsible way in that sense. Like I said, asking AI to give you criticism, challenging your ideas, view it as interlocutor instead of telling it to do things for you. That's an important way to go around
mm,
doing things.
mm. So do you think AI could there should be an increasing role that AI plays in a student's life proportional to like how they progress through the school system. Like in kindergarten, there should be basically no AI, but then like in high school, there could be like, I guess, more of that so they can learn how to think about like more complex problems with the support of this external system. And then in university and beyond, that's when there could be this like full integration of human thinking and AI thinking.
I don't know whether you'll call it full integration. I think human thinking is still independent and unique. I mean, AI only
Uh-huh.
gets its
Yes.
ideas from humans as well, right? I think what what we need to view this more to say, well, it's integration might not be the right word. It's the inclusion of AI and recognition of its purposes as a good tool for humans to use. AI can do certain things, but let's keep it at those certain things and let's not expand it beyond that. And even being very just talking out of my own experience, it's very easy to overestimate someone's own reasoning abilities. As a high school student, I mean, I was not reasoning very well. I look at my papers, I have drafts of almost everything I've ever written in the folders I have behind me. I read back on my old drafts, I'm like, I can't believe I ever thought that was good enough to send off to a journal. But I did send it off to a journal. Now that's good because I get feedback from the journal, I improve my writing. But nonetheless, that's like me in high school, me in university. I'm sending stuff off. I'm nowhere near good enough to write and reason. And in that sense, should I have AI do those things for me? Probably not. It could help me
Right.
write better if it gives me criticism, but I'm not going to say, well, please write this essay for me, do it for me instead. No, I have to go through the process, the hard process of just writing so much essays that I'm so used to writing and I can phrase my ideas in clear ways that I can then progress in writing. And that takes a lot of writing. To get better at writing, you need to write. And I recently, just out of interest, I compiled all my undergraduate essays into one PDF and I into one document. And I compiled all my graduate essays into one document. I think the total word count was of over like 500,000 words or something like that. Like I had a ridiculous amount of writing. And that's being at Oxford where you're writing every single week an essay of around 1,000 to 3,000 words. That's one or two essays. And that's how you get better at writing, is by writing a lot. And if we tell AI to write for us, before you've written 500,000 words worth of arguments and ideas, you're already preventing yourself from actually doing the hard work of having to write without assistance.
Mhm.
And I think in this way, I would even be reluctant to tell students to use AI to write going into university,
Mm.
because even as an Oxford student, I don't want to sound obnoxious or like a kind of self-aggrandizing here, but even as an Oxford student, I was very bad at writing. It took me a long time to get my first publication, after getting into Oxford. So it takes a long time to get good at these skills. Reading as well. If you're telling AI to summarize things for you, that's not going to help you. I have like books you can see back over there. I've read probably most of them. I've read countless more books than that. That's just what I have in Hong Kong, plus things I borrow from libraries. I'm still getting better at my reading skills. If I tell AI to summarize this stuff, I would not have been able to do the hard work to actually get my reading skills better by having to go page by page through these works and understand sentence by sentence what Kant or what Hegel or what Heidegger was writing about. So you have to do the hard work. And once you've done the hard work, then bring AI back in as a tool. Don't go to AI first and then try to develop the hard work later. That's not going to work, I think.
Mm. Yeah, I totally agree. Um, I guess what you said reminds me of like Heidegger's like the question of technology,
Mm,
like AI as like sort of like standing reserve, that can be
mhm,
used as like I guess like it's just what we make of it, and it's not inherently anything morally problematic, but
mm.
yeah, interesting take.
Yeah. No, I think a lot of things are what we make of it in this world.
Hmm.
There's a lot of gray out there and a lot of that to explore, and it's not always the same for every person. Some it might be good for someone to be using AI and be really horrible for someone else to be using AI. And I think that's unique personalization is something going forward, which we all have to think more about as a society in general. How do we have an education, have a society tailored to the needs of the individual? And AI might be very good at doing that, but we need to find and think of ways in which we can integrate these developments responsibly.
Hmm. Yeah. Another question I have about AI is I feel like since it's ultimately like based on like it's a large language model and language
Mm-hmm.
itself is this really culturally embedded thing. But today, like basically all of the major AI systems are based in English. So do you think there could be more opportunities to have like AI for different languages and therefore have like these different kind of cultural sensibilities and different ways of engaging with the world through that language particularly and have that customized to people of different cultures and identities?
I think so. I think it's possible. I think that would help. I think a lot of research could be done on that. It would be very interesting to see the comparisons. Like someone could do comparative AI as a field of inquiry, right? Like
Hmm.
compare, I don't know, Chinese AI to English AI, what are the value differences between them, or even the vector, the difference between the vectors of different words? That could be quite a
Hmm.
fundamental analysis. Assuming we can better understand how AI vectoring works and stuff like that, right?
Right.
Assuming we have a better understanding, that could be a very interesting field of study for linguists, sociologists, philosophers, all that sort. But also, I think there is a question of, well, what values do we want preserved? Not
Hmm.
all cultures are equal. I might get cancelled for saying this, but that's just how things are. Not all cultures are equal, and not all values are the same. We have to think about what values do we want to preserve going forward and what not. And that's a further question in general that we have to be thinking about. Like things
Hmm.
are not value neutral, and we have to understand that by engaging within a world which is not value neutral with our own values, which are obviously not value neutral, because no one goes through life saying, "Oh, I just like everything," or "Everything's equally acceptable." Like no one goes through life like that. We need to think about, well, what does that mean for AI going forward? And this all raises more questions. And I think right now we're in an exciting time where AI is one of those things which is raising so many questions just completely across the board about humanity, culture, language, all this sorts. By just exploring these different avenues, we'll be bound to just come up with a lot more thought and a lot more reflection on these topics.
Mm. Yeah. So you think like AI alignment research would be really important going forward,
Yeah.
um,
Mm-hmm.
and like regulating, um, making sure laws are in place to manage that sort of
Yeah.
stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Definitely. I think
cool.
that's very important.
Okay. I guess that brings us to the end of the interview today. So thank you so much for your time. Really enjoyed our chat. Yes.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.